My name is Ryan Mitchell, and for 10 years, I thought my marriage to Laura was the kind people envied. We had 2 kids, a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, and a rhythm to our lives that felt solid. Laura was charming, beautiful, and full of energy. She could light up a room with her smile, and when she laughed, it was hard not to join in. But over time, that light felt like it wasn't shining for me anymore. It started with small things. Her enthusiasm for our family traditions began to wane. She was on edge more often, her attention buried in magazines, letters, and endless conversations with people I wasn't part of. The first major red flag came when she announced, almost offhandedly, that she was going to Vegas for a girls' weekend. She rarely took trips without me, but she framed it as an overdue reunion with her best friend, Amy, and some high school friends she hadn't seen in years. Something about the way she said it bothered me. Her tone was casual, but her eyes darted away from mine. Still, I didn't argue. I trusted her, or at least I wanted to. When she came back from the trip, she seemed different. She was buzzing with energy, grinning like she was carrying some incredible secret. She handed me a small stack of photos from the trip, bright, glossy prints of her by the pool, at the casino, and at a couple of restaurants. But something felt off. That night, as I flipped through the photos, I noticed the numbers scrawled on the back of each one, marking their order in the roll. A childhood habit of mine kicked in. I started counting. From the 24-frame film roll, there were only 18 photos. "Hey, Laura," I called out, trying to keep my tone light. "Where are the rest of the pictures?" She glanced up from the TV, her face a perfect mask of indifference. "Oh, some of them didn't come out," she said with a shrug. "Bad lighting, blurry shots. You know how it is." Her answer made sense. But as I watched her turn back to the screen, something gnawed at me. I'd developed plenty of film before, and I knew the labs always included the bad shots in the envelope, even if they were garbage. Why weren't those pictures there? That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My instincts screamed at me to dig deeper, but I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. Laura was my wife, the woman I'd promised to trust for better or worse. But sometimes trust isn't enough. Couldn't let it go. Those 6 missing photos haunted me like a bad dream, whispering questions I couldn't ignore. A week after Laura's trip, while she was out running errands, I went looking for answers. I started with her suitcase, which she had shoved into the back of the closet. Inside, it was empty except for a few crumpled receipts and a playing card from one of the casinos. Nothing unusual. Next, I moved to her desk. Laura had a habit of stuffing things into drawers without much thought, and I hoped I might find something there. At first, it was just bills, old receipts, and random papers. But then I found it. A second envelope of photos, hidden beneath a stack of takeout menus. My heart raced as I pulled it out. Inside were 6 photos, glossy and crisp like the others she had shown me. But these weren't like the ones of her by the pool or at the casino. In the first picture, Laura was sitting at a restaurant booth, leaning toward a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, clean-shaven, with a confident grin and an arm draped casually over her shoulder. The next few photos were worse. There was one of them laughing together at what looked like a bar, her hand resting on his chest. Another of them sharing a drink with 2 straws. And the last one, the one that made my stomach twist, was of them standing in front of the famous Vegas sign, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, her head tilted toward his. They looked happy. I stared at the photos, my mind racing. Who was this guy? Had she lied about the trip being with Amy? My hands shook as I shoved the photos back into the envelope, my pulse pounding in my ears. When Laura came home that evening, I could barely look at her. "You okay?" she asked, her tone casual. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." She didn't push, which only made me more suspicious. She didn't care enough to notice something was wrong. That night, while she slept, I sat in the living room, staring at those photos. My emotions churned. Anger, sadness, disbelief. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but a small voice in my head stopped me. "Wait, get the full story. The photos were just the beginning." I needed to know who this guy was and how long this had been going on. It wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about understanding the scope of her lies. The next morning, I waited until Laura left for work before I started digging. First, I searched the receipts from her suitcase. One of them was from a fancy Vegas restaurant, and another was for a pair of drinks from a bar. Both were for dates that lined up with her trip. But the most damning receipt was for a hotel, a boutique spot far from the one she said she stayed at with Amy. I called the hotel, pretending to be her husband, confirming a stay for an upcoming trip. The receptionist was polite but firm. "We can't share details about previous reservations." I hung up, frustrated, but I wasn't giving up. I checked her credit card statement next. Sure enough, there was a charge from the same hotel. Now I knew for sure. She hadn't been with Amy. She had been with him. That night, I tried to act normal while eating dinner with her and the kids. But every time she smiled, every casual comment she made, it felt like a knife twisting deeper. How could she sit there, pretending everything was fine, while she was lying to all of us? Later, as she scrolled through her phone on the couch, I couldn't take it anymore. "How's Amy?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She glanced up, her expression unreadable. "She's fine." "Why?" I shrugged. "Just curious. Haven't heard you mention her much since the trip." Her smile was tight, forced. "We've both been busy. You know how it is." Her lie was so smooth, so effortless, that it made my blood boil. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her until I had undeniable, unshakable proof. I needed to catch her in the act. I started checking her phone whenever she left it unattended. It didn't take long to find something. She had a text thread with a contact saved as R, filled with flirty messages and plans to meet. "Miss you already. Last weekend was amazing. R." I had no doubt it was the guy from the photos. The texts with R confirmed everything I had feared. My suspicions weren't paranoia, they were fact. I stared at her phone, my mind racing with anger and betrayal. Every word I read felt like a dagger. That weekend, Laura told me she was going to meet Amy for brunch. "I'll be back in a few hours," she said, grabbing her purse. Her tone was casual, her smile warm. I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. "Have fun." As soon as she left, I followed her. She didn't go to the cafe where she and Amy usually met. Instead, she drove across town to a park. I parked a few cars away, my heart pounding as I watched her get out and walk toward a man waiting by a bench. It was him, R, the guy from the photos. He greeted her with a hug that lasted too long to be friendly, and they walked hand in hand toward a trail. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few pictures. Proof. They didn't go far, sitting on a secluded bench just off the path. I stayed back, hidden behind some trees, as they laughed and talked like a couple on a romantic date. My blood boiled as I watched him lean in to kiss her. That was it. I stepped out of the shadows, my footsteps loud against the gravel. "Enjoying yourselves?" I said, my voice calm but cold. They broke apart, their faces turning pale. Laura jumped up, her eyes wide with shock. "Jason, what are you doing here?" she stammered. I held up my phone, showing her the pictures. "Catching you in the act." The man, R, stood up, his expression shifting from surprise to defiance. "Look, man, I don't know what your deal is, but..." I cut him off. "You don't get to talk. This is between me and my wife." Laura stepped forward, her face hardening. "Jason, you're overreacting." I laughed bitterly. "Overreacting? You've been sneaking around with him, lying to me, and I'm overreacting." She crossed her arms, her tone dripping with arrogance. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need to find it somewhere else." Her words hit me like a slap. My fists clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "You've already made your choice, Laura. I'm done." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her lover. The drive home felt like a blur, my emotions swinging between rage and heartbreak. Laura's audacity, her dismissive attitude. It was like she didn't even care about the destruction she was causing. I couldn't let her get away with this. When she returned later that evening, She walked in as if nothing had happened. Her bag hit the counter, and she gave me a quick, fake smile. "Hey," she said casually. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and turned it toward her. On the screen were the photos I had taken of her with her at the park, along with the texts I had saved from her phone. Her face drained of color. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back, arms crossed. "This is the truth, Laura. You've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone. And now everyone's going to know." She snapped out of her shock and glared at me. "You wouldn't dare." I raised an eyebrow. "Wouldn't I? You made your choices, Laura. Now you're going to deal with the consequences." The next morning, I sent the evidence to her family and close friends. The fallout was immediate. Her parents, who had always adored her, were devastated. Her best friend called me in tears, saying she had no idea Laura was capable of this. Laura's phone buzzed constantly with messages, but she ignored them, her anger directed squarely at me. "You're such a vindictive bastard," she spat. "You couldn't just handle this privately?" I laughed bitterly. "Privately? Like how you privately destroyed our marriage. Don't blame me for exposing your lies, Laura. Blame yourself." The divorce. I filed for divorce the next day. With the evidence I had gathered, the process was swift. Laura tried to fight for the house, but the judge wasn't sympathetic to someone caught red-handed betraying their family. She moved out a month later, leaving behind the life she had so carelessly thrown away. Moving on. The weeks that followed were hard. Explaining the situation to our kids was the most painful part, but I kept things honest and age-appropriate. I refused to let Laura's actions define our future. With time, I began to rebuild. Therapy helped me process the betrayal, and my friends and family stood by me every step of the way. The lesson learned. Looking back, I realized that Laura's betrayal was a painful but necessary wake-up call. It taught me that love without trust is hollow and that no relationship can survive on lies. To anyone facing a similar situation, my advice is simple. Trust your instincts, stand your ground, and never settle for less than you deserve. Betrayal hurts, but it doesn't have to define you. As for Laura, last I heard, moved on quickly, leaving her alone to pick up the pieces. Karma has a funny way of working things out. Conclusion. The missing pictures may have revealed the truth, but they also set me free. This chapter of my life is closed, and I'm ready to move forward, wiser, stronger, and free from her lies.